Welcome to Google. Teller, you're holding a microphone. Will you speak today?
No.
Teller, what are the origins of being silent on stage during your act?
You're asking me the exact same questions that the New York Times guy did, just as if they were right on the piece of paper.
Now you caught me.
When I was a teenager, I rebelled against the idea of magic patter because it always seemed redundant. You know, a guy would be standing up there going, "Here I have a red ball." Well, yeah. Or it would be, you know, a kid like me. When I was like 12, I did a Chinese magic act where I had, you know, like a long mustache and a little hat and an orange velvet robe, and I claimed to be 200 years old and lived in ancient China because I didn't know how long ago China was ancient. And as an audience member, I would find that insulting. So when I started to get a little more idea what was going on, I thought it would be interesting to drop patter so that people would have to put together what they're looking at on their own. And nothing fools you better than the lie you tell yourself. So if I say, here is a perfectly ordinary pack of cards, you're going to mistrust me. If I hand you the cards and go like this and you shuffle them, then you'll believe that that's a real pack of cards even if it's fake. So it was partly the idea of not doing redundant patter, and it was partly the idea of making magic more convincing. Then eventually I discovered that there's all sorts of cool things that happen. Like for me, because I'm not like an overpowering personality, undercutting the kinds of places that I was working at frat parties at college, and if I had tried to overpower those kids with their cups of beer, you know, groping their girlfriends, they would have paid no attention to me. I don't think they paid that much attention to me the way I did it, but it was more than I would have had otherwise. I just set up a couple of lawn spots and did things like swallow razor blades and let them put that together and let them be a little bit creeped out by that. And that sort of compelled attention. And you feel like an idiot if you're heckling a silent guy. And then eventually, working with Penn all these years, what I've discovered is there's something absolutely incredible that happens when you don't talk. You know, everything becomes very intimate because you're looking at them, they're looking at you, and that intimacy is really thrilling to me.
Now, I saw your show on Thursday, and you mentioned during the show that you met Teller during his razor blade act. Over in
it was needles by the time.
Needles.
He'd streamlined it.
And that was over 40 years ago.
Yeah, around then. You know, the origin stories have been retold so many times. I don't think there's really any truth left in them. Yeah, it was 40 years ago. I mean, I was when I met Teller for the first time, I was still in high school, and so that gives you some sort of chronology on that. Teller was a high school teacher while I was in high school, but different high schools. And
you taught Latin and English, if I'm correct?
Latin and Greek.
Greek
Classics.
And study hall.
And so it was around that time. And I think probably if I were, it all depends on what we're defining, but probably the first trick I saw Teller do was probably not, as I say in the show, the needles, but probably you were doing a thing called glorpy, I think, with a handkerchief, or maybe Out of This World or something. You might have been doing something backstage at the first Marshek shows, and if we were actually to have a court record and read it back, I might have seen you do something magical before that. But yeah, he was doing a show, and I remember it as being in a library in New Jersey, you know, one of these library basement community shows. But that doesn't mean that's true. Probably is not. Probably the fact that I remember it makes it less likely to be true.
And I think the first thing I saw Penn do was ride a unicycle in a pair of shorts and mismatched sneakers, wearing no shirt but a tablecloth tied around his neck and juggling. Right? Was that?
I don't think that would have been right. But
no,
something close to
there we go.
But it was around that same time. It was a classical music show at Amherst College. It was where we both worked at that show. That we have some evidence of. But I still think the story that we met in Nam is much better. Maybe it's time to just do a clean break and just keep that from then on. You know, I was the youngest fighter pilot. Sounds good.
Respect. Now, you're magicians who advocate reason. Do you find
Although if we weren't captured because we were good soldiers. No, no, none of those losers.
Oh, America's great again. As magicians who advocate reason, do you find that is contradictory or complementary to your work?
I think it's exactly complementary. I mean, magic is just a playful way of exploring how we ascertain truth. You know, Teller's often fond of calling it the unwilling suspension of disbelief, but it is a form where you don't invite the audience to go along with your fantasy, but rather you force them to, and they should have a chip on their shoulder. So every time you do a trick that's successful, you have taught everybody in the audience that some way that they ascertain truth is incorrect, and that leads me to skepticism and to pro-science, and works hand in hand. Now, there have been two major schools of thought in magic. I mean, the discovery of witchcraft, the first magic book, 1500s?
1584.
1584. The first magic book talks about these being tricks as opposed to real magic. And then that thread of that way of dealing with magic as tricks, or as the magician is an actor playing the part of a magician, that kind of thing goes to Houdini, and then goes to Amazing Randy, and is a direct line, hand in hand, and friendly with the scientists. And no sort of anybody that comes to you when you're that kind of magician and says what you're doing is bullshit, the answer to that is yes. It's a simple yes, and there's no argument whatsoever. You know, if someone comes up to us after the show and says, you didn't really, and whatever the rest of that sentence is, the answer is, of course not. We were doing tricks. Then there's the other school of thought that's followed by all the people who claimed real powers from time immemorial, religious figures and so on, up to the spiritualists of the 19th century, and then we get into the 20th century and you get Uri Geller, and then you've even got, and friends of ours. I mean, we disagree with them strongly, but they are friends of ours. I mean, David Blaine and Chris Angel, who do stuff like say, well, last week I was doing card tricks, but now I've been studying science, and now I can do something that was physically impossible before. But I'm really doing this. It was just card tricks last week. What the fuck are you talking about? How high are you? But, we have had, I really want to be careful about this because I don't want to misrepresent, especially David Blaine's position, because he makes the position very strongly and he believes it very strongly. And we disagree, but that does not give me the right to misrepresent what he says. But in my understanding of what he says, and please don't take this as what Blaine says, but rather, find out on your own. He believes that the magician's job is to have somebody leave the show with misconceptions about reality. He wants to have it actually bleed into the real world, and so that you leave and you think, well, maybe this could be this and maybe this could be that. In other words, you leave his shows possibly believing things or considering things that he himself knows not to be true. Now, he's never said that in those words. That's my understanding. The rule we try to follow, our ideal, and we fail at this, but our ideal is what I think of as the sawing a person in half principle, which is when you go to a magic show and you see someone sawn into halves, discounting people way off the bell curve, young children and people that are seriously mentally ill. I really have to say that. You can't ever say everyone. But people, the vast, vast majority of the people, just down to the noise on that bell curve, do not leave the theater thinking they've witnessed a murder. Now, that's really important, right? Because that means that they understand at a very deep level that there was a trick. And then you get to what's called mentalism, which is the term that magicians use for mind reading. And then it gets sloppy Because even the people who don't say, I can read minds, will say, I'm using principles of magic and psychology and study of human nature to be able to tell you which card you're thinking of, as opposed to, I forced a card on you and I knew what it was before the show started, okay, which is the actual truth. And they do all of this stuff. And some people would leave the theater thinking, after seeing a mentalist act, that they had witnessed somebody who was incredibly good at psychology or incredibly good at memory tricks or incredibly good at any of that. And that is distorting the real world. That means you're leaving the theater thinking someone on planet Earth is able to do something that previously you might not have thought they could do, or that person could do something that maybe someone else can really do. That's a very difficult rule to follow right across the board. And we work really hard on it. We're always rewriting stuff because people say to us after the show, oh, you can really, and as soon as you say that to us, it means we have to go rewrite. So we do a book test, which is a kind of a jargony term for someone selects one book out of many. All the pages are different. You close all those doors. They open it up. They pick a moment of it, and I know what moment they've picked. Now, to sell that, if you're a bad writer, you sell that with, I can read your mind. Or I can ask you questions, and the way you answer and the way you react, I can tell what you picked. Or I can read your body language and tell what you picked. Or I've memorized the whole book, and I can tell by looking over here what you've picked. All of those are really good stories, But the way we do it is we are doing a trick and have no special powers, which means the trick has to be a lot stronger, because what you've done is you've stripped away all the misdirection, all the stuff you can think about. Because and especially smart people, while you're saying to yourself, well, certainly can memorize the book. People memorize the Quran, they memorize the Bible. That's not a lot of stuff to memorize. We can memorize that. And certainly there's a lot of stuff that shows you that people react certain ways when they're lying, and you can tell by the way they react to this. And while you're thinking of all of that, I've just had a signal to me. So that makes the tricks much harder. Much, much harder. And you've also, the term in magic is closing the doors. There's, you're leaving a lot of, you're leaving the path how it's really done that way. But at the end of that, you end up with something that's moral. And I believe that giving people information that you know to be incorrect about the physical world is morally wrong.
It's also artistically kind of not very satisfying to smart people. When I see a mentalist present something as though it's maybe I really have powers, I really go, oh yeah, right. And I think that a lot of people do that. And we try to write our show for people who are we can only write it for people who are as smart as we are, because we can't be smarter than we are. But we try to write it for people who are at least as smart as we are, and they all are smarter anyway.
We have a lot of smart people in the audience. Did you see there are 2 microphones in both of our aisles? If you'd like to ask Penn Teller any questions.
That was a segue. You could do morning radio.
Thank you.
Let's go to Lucy in the Sky with traffic.
I appreciate that. But yes, they're open. If you'd like to ask a question, please come on up and I'll call on you. Thanks a lot. Oh, wow, that was an honor. Oh, we got a taker. Go ahead. Very excited.
Hello. Mr. Teller. Yeah. Obviously, when you're on stage, you don't talk at all, but was there any time when you were on stage and you were really tempted to say something?
Penn tells me that sometimes when I'm on stage in the dark and something has gone wrong or I've bumped into something, I will say fuck a lot.
The first 8 rows know that too.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you guys so much for coming out here today. I'm a big fan of your show, Fool Us. I really love watching it. I think it's a lot of fun. And I'm always really interested after a trick gets done, you guys sort of huddle in together and start discussing how you think it was done. And we never hear that. And I'm always really curious, what types of things you discuss after you've seen a trick and you're working on trying to figure out how it was done.
Well, the show is called Fool Us, but far and away it should be called Fool Teller. Teller's smarter than me and knows a lot more about this stuff than I do. Mostly what I'm doing is trying to take what Teller's saying and find a way to say what Teller's gleaned in a way that is entertaining and also operates. The difficult part of that show for me is I want to, after we've seen the trick, I want to give enough code phrases that especially young people or people who are new to magic, but that's often young people. I've pictured a 13, 14, 15-year-old person in my mind who was similar to what we would have been, who'd be sitting there watching the show probably 2 or 3 times over in maybe a YouTube clip, listening to what I say carefully and doing keyword searches on all of that using, well, a search engine. And be able to pull up the actual information that would give them the details. Be able to do that while talking in a way that keeps it entertaining and funny for the families that are watching and just want to watch a magic show and don't want to get technical about it. So I'm trying to put all that together. While we talk very openly about how the trick is done, obviously. We're both mic'd, and the people in the control booth are listening to what we're saying. And Johnny Thompson, who I would say Teller is the second best magic mind alive today, and Johnny Thompson is the first. Johnny's our mentor. Johnny's our friend. Johnny's works with us in everything we do. Johnny's listening to what we say, and Johnny is just telling from the first 2 or 3 sentences. He's looking at the producers and going, they've got it, they haven't got it. And then they watch us go down whatever road we're going down. So all those decisions are made. I try to speak up because there have been a couple of times when I've seen something that Teller hasn't seen, or I've known a little something, a little nuance that Teller didn't know. And I have made a very big mistake at assuming Teller knew something like the flipper that I knew and had on my desk at home and he didn't know about, and I didn't mention it because I thought he must know it, and then that one fooled us when it didn't fool me at all. I just thought since it fooled Teller, it must have fooled me, so I fooled myself because I'm a fucking idiot. But we talk about that and then try to make it as entertaining an expose as we can. You know, the show is a lie, and I hope it's a lie that many people see through. We're very troubled by all these talent shows where somebody comes out and talks about someone's showmanship and their pitch and all this. Well, pitch is tangible, but all this intangible stuff like charisma and all of that. And all I can ever do when I see even a moment of those shows, which is probably the most I've seen, is I picture my heroes like Sun Ra or Tiny Tim or Bob Dylan, or how well they do on those shows. And it fills me with rage to think of those empty-headed assholes judging people who they aren't fit to eat shit off their shoes. So our show is very specifically, I believe, we have never had on a show the best act fool us. The most successful act from the first run that we did was Piff the Magic Dragon, who got a whole show in Vegas and is now on America's Got Talent and has had a huge career that I think he would say was launched by Fool Us, and yet by the numbers he was a loser. His trick didn't fool us. We gave him a standing ovation and loved him. So what we're really trying to do there is whenever you see a magic show, you think there must be camera tricks. And whenever you see a magic show, you are right. There's never been a magic show on TV that didn't use camera tricks. And the camera trick is very simply multiple takes and putting the camera where you want, right? One very famous magician, his producer said to me, "We don't use camera tricks. Lots of editing tricks, no camera tricks." And for the street magic stuff, just repetition gives you that. If I throw you a deck of cards right now and you take your video phone and you go out on the street and you, with no skills whatsoever, have someone pick a card, then tell them what card they picked, and you do that around 50 times, you might get lucky. And if all you show is the time you got lucky, that could be a miracle that no one can figure out. So people, although they may not have stated it that way, everybody knows that in their heart, that everything on TV is jive. So on Fool Us, because we're doing this silly little game show, you know in a really visceral way that they can't do it more than once. because that would give us a leg up. So you're not seeing any edits there. And you also know that it's being done right for us right then. And there's a sense that you feel, and this is, I hate to break it down like this, and we contradict this, but it's a shorthand. You feel that the camera people are on the audience's side. They're not trying to help the magician because it's Penn and Teller's show. Of course, it's much more complicated than that, but I think that's what you feel. So what we're talking about during then is usually we're talking about how great the act was, and we are hoping against hope to be fooled, because that's when it's the most fun for us. And the other question that someone is going to ask, and I might as well answer because it's right in the same sentence, is do we ever find out how they did it? The answer is the second they fool us, when we go to commercial, they run to us and roll up their sleeves and go, "See, this is how I did it. Cool, huh?" I don't think there's been one person yet who stayed cool about that. Maybe the French guy in England was.
The French guy did that, and John Lovick, who fooled us this season with a torn and restored piece of paper.
Has that been on yet?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Yeah, it was on.
Handsome Jack.
Handsome Jack fooled us with this simple torn and restored paper, and it just drove me crazy. So I kept emailing back and forth, and he kept dropping me little hints and little more hints and little more hints. And it finally turned out he explained it to me, and it was just plain old normal sleight of hand of which we knew every single move. He had just engineered it so that we couldn't perceive it. I have to say this one more thing, which is the judges on those talent shows have nothing at stake. And we have our reputation at stake. And the very first time we did the very first show, the first guy came out and fooled us, and we went, "Holy fuck! Everybody's going to fool us. We're going to look like idiots." And so we end up getting sort of the best of both worlds, which is we get that tension of, okay, we'll figure this one out. Oh, we failed. Oh joy, we failed, because we really are trying. And any magician who comes out and says, just let magic wash over you, let it wash over you with a wave of mystery, nobody does that. And this is maybe the first show that really acknowledged that it really acknowledges that at one level magic is a competitive, uncomfortable thing to watch. You don't watch it sitting back, letting it wash over you. You go, there's something that looks like it's totally wrong with the world. I got to fix that. Our friend Mike Close describes the magician. He says, a magician is a person who gives you the gift of a stone in your shoe.
And yes, we did notice that the trophy says "F-U" on it, and it wasn't an accident. We have two major shows, bullshit and F-U. That's the way we roll.
Thank you.
And you could, of course, watch Fool Us every Monday at 8 o'clock on the CW. There's your plug.
Why, that's tonight.
You're going to go to morning radio. You'll be hosting Rocktober in no time.
In that movie about the amazing Randy that's on Netflix right now, all the charlatans make the claim at the end of the movie that despite all the work he's done, they're making more money than ever. Do you think, is that true, or are they just trying to how do you feel about that?
I believe everyone that we trashed on bullshit has done at least as well or better after we trashed them. I don't think that means anything. I think that information and truth on its own is worth something, and the fact that some people disagree with us and here give the attention that we give them, and then go and follow someone I consider a charlatan. I believe that's simply the marketplace of ideas, and to think different would be insane, because a lot of stuff we did on bullshit is wrong, and someday, although I've never seen it, Randy may be wrong. So blind faith in Randy is no better than blind faith in anyone else. It is a little bit sad when people that I have no doubt at all in my mind are charlatans and frauds are doing well, and I see the people duped. That is a little heartbreaking, but that's where the marketplace of ideas works. It means I just have to talk more. The answer to bad speech is always more speech.
Yes, sir.
So this one's for Penn. One of my favorite things of yours is the monologue you did on comedic timing, watching the space shuttle go up.
Oh, thanks.
And I was wondering, first off, if you've seen the latest pictures of Pluto that the Voyager's probe put up.
Well, when you say latest, I don't know.
New Horizons. Sorry, yeah.
I saw a bunch of them.
Yeah.
I know they're being downloaded still.
Sure. Well, the ones that have come in the recent period, and I wanted to know what your reaction was to seeing.
I don't have anything to say about comedy on that, but
kind of a tangential point, and also Teller if you're into space at all, since I figure a lot of the people in the audience are also into it.
Yeah, I have no special awe to claim. It makes my heart jump the same way it does yours, I imagine. I mean, that's a universal. I can't believe we sent something that far and for that long and didn't fuck it up. If it were up to me, we wouldn't get a probe to Brooklyn.
Good stuff. Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Hey guys, thanks for being here. I'm a magician, and
Don't blame yourself.
Teller, I love what you're saying about patter and kind of like, hanging around the castle and stuff. You see a lot of guys falling into that, right? Like the corny, like magic guy thing. Why do you think that? Why do you think people fall into that kind of trap? And how do we as a community kind of like expand beyond that? And like what's the rebrand strategy?
Well, my rebrand was hiring Penn. Magic is, I believe, the strongest form you can possibly have in the theater, because it is so intense. I mean, what all the other arts aspire to a sense of the miraculous, and magic is the one that, when you're right in the room, seems to actually be producing a miracle. So the dumbest dove act automatically has power. That means that many people get into magic who really have nothing to offer except doing tricks successfully. Because if they show the handkerchief empty and the dove pops out, the audience will applaud. In stand-up comedy, there's no such thing to lean on. People have to get good at talking. So I think there are a lot of people in magic who are just there because it was the only thing that they could get applause for.
Yeah, thank you.
I know that sounds depressing, doesn't it?
Thank you, buddy. Yes, sir.
So thank you for coming, and I wanted to thank you for making bullshit. I really appreciated how the show addressed controversial topics, and even when I didn't agree with you, it was still handled in an honest way that I still liked you as people and felt that you were approaching things fairly. So my question is, were there topics that you couldn't handle in bullshit that you wanted to, or anything nowadays after that show was done that you wish you had a chance to cover?
Yes, to all of those. The way we came up with the topics for each season, you often forget that budget played a big part in it. We have topics that you always want to go to some sort of big censorship, or we couldn't take them on or something. But some things were just too expensive or not photogenic. We always wanted to do things on vitamins. But it's just, you can't do that same shot of the vitamins being scooped up that's used from and then we couldn't get crews in to do the real shooting, and who do you talk to? I mean, that's one of the really dull reasons we can't do that. The only one we were stopped from doing was Scientology, which Showtime did not want us to do because they were frightened. Scientology there are stories of people having trouble with Scientology, and they were frightened by that. And I made the mistake I guess maybe it wasn't a mistake. I made a mistake of saying to Trey Parker, who's a friend of ours from South Park, who I said, they won't let us do Scientology. And just as a fuck you to us, they did Scientology. And it is a fabulous show and better than we would have ever done. And they also, we considered ourselves to be kind of the experts on mentalism and talking to the dead. And South Park's John Edward show absolutely creams us. It explains cold reading better than we ever have. It explains those charlatans better than we ever have. They just beat us at our own game beautifully. A lot of stuff we look back on now. It's been, we started in 2001, so it's been many, many years. A lot of the stuff we were wrong on. We always wanted to close and do our final show, The Bullshit of Bullshit. which we would just bust ourselves. You know, who the fuck cares what two Vegas magicians think about this shit? They're not scientists. And then there's these assholes, you know, and really do that and go through the mistakes we made. We never get a chance to do that. We're still talking about it with other people who, you know, maybe Netflix or somebody will let us do the bullshit of bullshit. There's topics we did that were much less successful than others. We did 84 shows, you know, and we had a good solid pitch for 10 when we went to sell the show. So, you know, there were 74 that we pulled out of our ass. But you know, I would love to be doing it again. I thought it was a good form, and I like what you say about this. You know, we tried very hard to be fair and extremely biased. And that's what I want out of news. I long for the days, and I'm liking that they're coming back, when there was, like, you know, the Great Plains Republican, and the news organization said right in their name what they did. And I would like news to come on and go, you know, good evening, I hate Obama, and here's the news. Once you know that, you can deal it. You know, you can dial it in. Once you've said, you know, we're Penn and Teller, we're atheists, we're libertarians, and here's the way we see this issue, I think you've got a lot of information there. I think somebody with very different, I think a Christian socialist can then watch that show and know what we're talking about. I mean, that's the way we deal with people. When friends are telling you something, you know they're biased, and you hope that they're fair. And I will brag on how fair we are in that we didn't do any of the Michael Moore stuff. I don't think you can find, of course you can find, but very rare, and it only because it slipped by us, is there ever a time that someone who is speaking is taken out of context. There was a few people we had on that were so goofy looking, and I mean, there's no other way to say it, ugly, that we, using a shot of them making their case, just made it look like their position made no sense because they were so unattractive. That happened in one case. And we looked at that and said, no. We're going to do a shot of this person walking that's more flattering, and then we'll do shots what they're talking about, so that's in VO, so we don't have that. And once we were accused of taking someone out of context, we went back and did the show again and gave people, we had a rambling 10-second passage that was absolute nonsense, and someone said, you've taken that out of context. We went back on and did another show and let them do 3 minutes of the rambling nonsense that had the 10 seconds within it, and said, there's your context. Actually, we made them look better. And I learned something about my own cynicism from doing that show, and that we pitched it in kind of a cynical way. We pitched it that even people that hated us would still watch, and therefore Showtime would still make money. And we expected to get a lot of hate mail, and we expected to kind of brag on that hate mail. And I'm very ashamed that that's the way I felt, because when we first put that show on, and we did some pretty heavy ones. I mean, we did the Bible, we did the Vatican, although Showtime never showed it again, but we did the Vatican. We did creationism. We did stuff very near and dear to people's hearts. And the letters we got that disagreed with us were very strong in their disagreement and very filled with love, and very much sounded like what you said, which was, you know, I'm a follower of Jesus. I believe I have eternal life. I pray for your hearts. You are honest. You do a good job. You are funny. I believe you are fair, and I hope you find Jesus sincerely in Christ. Man, it's hard to argue with that. And one of the reasons we did not do Islam is we've heard you get different letters from them.
Thank you.
Thank you, buddy. Yes, sir.
Thanks for coming here. Watched your show yesterday. It was great. I want to change track a little bit and ask you about Team Swarmir. So Team Swarmir, the documentary. So it was a really great documentary with very intriguing results, and I believe it took about 5 years in the making. So my question is, what made you invest so much time, energy, and money into making such a documentary?
Well, very simply, ignorance. We didn't expect it to take 5 years and that much money. That's how you get into every project. And I'm sure everybody in this room has started a project that was easy. Tim Jennison, been a dear friend of mine for 25 years. I had been spending a lot of time just working or with my family. I hadn't spent any time talking to someone that I wasn't getting paid for or I wasn't genetically related to. And I started to go a little crazy. So I called up Tim Jennison, who's an old friend of mine, and said, he says it was a desperate call. I remembered it just being pleasant. Saying, I haven't really talked to anybody. Why don't we have dinner tonight? So we flew in from Texas, went out to have a dinner, and over supper, I said to him, well, tell me about something that has nothing to do with my work and I can't possibly work on. Tell me something that we can just talk about, I can just listen to you. I just need to get my mind on other stuff besides work. And Tim said, well, how much do you know about Vermeer? And I said, well, probably first page of Wikipedia. That's probably what I got in my head. And he said, well, I think that he might have been using an optical device, and so I built an exact copy of Vermeer's studio in a warehouse in San Antonio, and I'm going to paint a Vermeer. And I said, boy, did you fail, because you need to film this. And then I tried to get somebody else to just make Tim's Vermeer. I wanted to just turn it over to somebody else and say, do this. And I wanted to just produce it and not really be part of it. I wanted to not produce it at all. Then I wanted to just produce it. And then we tried to find the best director for it. And after many tries, Teller was not our first choice. But after many conversations with people who didn't understand it, we knew Teller would understand it. So all of a sudden, it became a Penn and Teller project. And then all of a sudden, it turns out painting a Vermeer was a lot harder than any of us thought. And that took 5 years, and a little over, actually, and a lot of money. I mean, the movie lost a tremendous amount of money, even though it was phenomenally successful. But fortunately, Tim has the time and money and wanted to spread this around. What I find interesting about Tim's Vermeer is that more than Avatar, it's a movie that rests on technology. There was nobody in the world rich enough to make that movie 10 years before we made it. We shot, how many hours? I've forgotten now.
We ended up with 2,400 hours of usable footage. That's quite a ratio to a movie that's 70 minutes long.
But we had every brushstroke covered mostly from multiple cameras. There's not a time that the brush touches the canvas that isn't recorded. So it's a whole different kind of documentary. Most documentaries are made after the fact, and there's reenactment or talking about it. We had cameras there the whole time he was painting. And some of the people who are skeptics of Tim's theory have said, well, you could have faked this. We tell, well, come on, watch the 2,400 hours. You can watch everything. We have no secrets on this. It's all laid out. So I had no particular interest in the subject or making a movie. I certainly did not want to make a movie, but I had a love for Tim and thought we could make a movie that would make everybody else love Tim too. And it just seemed like important and compelling. I don't know why Teller can speak to why he got on board.
You invited me. Making that movie, I'm not going to answer that question exactly that way, but making that movie made it clear to me that life is undifferentiated experience. It's not a story. And when we went into it, we thought that I thought, and I think we all kind of thought, that we were making a movie about Vermeer. And then, so we really came in from that point of view. We know this is going to be a documentary about Vermeer, and Tim's made some discoveries that we're going to teach you. And when we looked at the first cut, which was 4 hours or so, we began exploring what the movie might actually be about. And the first direction that I went on this was thinking that it was Penn's story about his friend, right? That it's about Penn reflected off of his friend, because Penn had told me that story, and I thought, oh, that's a nice starting point for the movie. And then we kept watching the footage, and it became more and more apparent that the thing that you wanted to watch in the movie was Tim and his amazing level of care, intelligence, determination, humility, his ability to turn completely around when he's wrong after being very certain of something. And once we had that, then we just needed one little starting point to try to really turn that into a story. And I remembered the fragment of interview that I had done with Tim, which had been thrown out by the editor, by the way. I just sort of remembered having this conversation. I said, Tim, are you going to succeed in painting this painting? And there was this long pause, and Tim said, at night when I'm laying in bed, all I can think about is this goal of painting a Vermeer. Paint a Vermeer? I'm not even an artist. And when I remembered that, suddenly the story of the movie began to fall into place, because instead of being about Vermeer or about Tim in general, it could now be hung on this very simple act of painting the Vermeer. And so we had, there's so much fascinating information that we had to summarize in little, Penn and I labored over little bits of exposition. How do you talk about the center surround phenomenon with the retina? How do you talk about that in a way that somebody who's not a retinologist is going to understand, and give the audience just enough information? How do you orient the audience in such a way that those people who know next to nothing about Vermeer remember who he was? There was so much information that had to go into you just understanding what Tim was up to, that was a big struggle too, just compressing all of that stuff to try to get it so that it would be a nice arc of a story. And I remember that when we premiered it at Telluride, was it? At Telluride. We premiered it at Telluride, and sitting in that audience, really for the first time with a large group of people. We had done almost weekly screenings at Penn's house for groups of friends, and we had said to them, do you understand this? Do you understand that? Do you understand that? We thought we kind of had it. When we premiered it at Telluride, suddenly, there was this one big simple story. Oh, goodness, Tim painted a Vermeer. And there were funny moments in it, and there were, and it was all clear. And I just sat back with this enormous sense of joy and relief to hear this movie performing itself, and getting its laughs for the audience. Incidentally, there's a really long passage in it, which, if you've seen the movie, there's an endlessly long passage where Tim is just painting tiny, tiny, tiny little dots to represent the fibers of a carpet, and it goes on forever and ever. And we had trimmed it down so that it was all nice and moved nice and was fun and funny and all that sort of thing. And then we sat back and said, you know what? This is not boring enough. It doesn't really convey the feel of what he's doing. So we put boring shit back in so that now and then you'd get a laugh and it would be a relief and it wouldn't feel too much fun. Because, part of it is to just act out how much not fun is part of getting something that's wonderful.
And when we first went out to debut it, it was really, really funny, because when we would book the movie, Telluride and so on, the question everybody would ask before the show was, will Penn and Teller be at the screening? Will they be available for questions after the screening? And then after every screening, the question was, why were Penn and Teller at the screening? Why were they sitting on stage? Because after the movie, we would sit on a stage like this with people asking questions, and not one question would be directed to either of us. It was all just Tim. And that's what we wanted out of the movie.
We had crazy ideas along the way. I mean, we initially at one point we thought we were going to do it all like a bullshit episode, with Tim will paint for a while, and then Penn and Teller will come on and do a cute little bit that has some commentary, and that just fell away as Tim just came out of that movie.
We also made a very, very heavy decision to not have bad guys. The real easy structure on that, and the structure we're very familiar with, is what we do in bullshit, and then there's this asshole. And once you have bad guys, you can have heroes. And every bullshit episode is structured that way. As a matter of fact, we make sure we have the bad guys before we have the good guys. You got to have them. It makes the structure real easy. And we were talking among ourselves, but also to Steve Martin. had an important voice in that, and we decided, and I'm really proud of this. The movie does not have bad guys. And there are bad guys around this Vermeer thing like crazy. There are people that hated Tim doing this. There are people that think that anybody who talks about any artist using optics in any way is defeating the whole idea of art, that this was full-blown from his mind. There are raving lunatics, and there are also people with credentials saying stuff against Tim. There's really hateful stuff against Tim. And we just decided that what Tim was doing was so beautiful, we didn't want to show the other side. So you see, it's shadow boxing that you're watching. You're not watching a contest. And I'm really proud of that. Of the whole movie, that's one of the things that, one of the decisions we made that I'm really happy we made.
Yeah, we also we had to decide. For those of you who haven't seen the movie, I'm talking nonsense, but we had to decide where to end the story. And a lot of people said, well, you have to show the footage to people who disagree and let them comment on it. And then we thought about Tim, and Tim's idea was, can I do this? Can I satisfy myself? Can I do this experiment and be confident that I have probably the right explanation? And when we thought about that, we just said, when Tim finishes the action of the painting, that's when the story ends. And that gives it a kind of conciseness that was very satisfying to us. Because otherwise it just could have gone on forever, which after 5 years you don't want it to do.
Speaking of the end, we have time for one more question. No pressure.
Make sure it's a good one.
I hope it is. So you got me really curious. What would you put on the bullshit of bullshit episode? Like, what did you believe then that you no longer believe now?
It's really hard. It's really hard to do that because when we weren't sure of something, we couched it and hemmed and hawed to put things in. The secondhand smoke episode, we certainly say that the science on the dangers of secondhand smoke is not robust, which at the time it was not. We were accurate at the time. Now the studies have come out and they seem much more robust. But it was all couched in, should the government have control over this? In other words, do you have a right to do something to yourself that's dangerous? So the overall point, people try to say, would you take back the entire secondhand smoke episode? Now I think secondhand smoke is dangerous, and I think people have the right to expose themselves to that. People say that our global warming episode was incorrect, except we never did a global warming episode. What they're talking about is we had a certain kind of eye rolling and scoffing, and we were pretty upset at Al Gore selling the carbon credits, selling the carbon credits as though they were indulgences from the church. It was just, it didn't really do anything. It was just Al Gore saying, you can feel better about yourself. So our attack was against Al Gore, and I think anyone attacking Al Gore is fine anytime. For the rest of forever. I think that's absolute, that is bottom level truth. That is like pie that you can attack Al Gore. But we certainly, the idea that there may be anthropogenic climate change is much more robust when we did it, except we didn't do an episode really attacking that. So what people are attacking us for, and they do, is our nuances and our attitude toward that, although I don't believe we said anything wrong during that. But if we did a bullshit of bullshit, we would spin that to make ourselves more wrong, to then be able to attack it and do that same dichotomy we did not do on Tim's Vermeer, which is what we do on bullshit. We would do everything we could to make us the villains. Hypnotism, I think the show was a clusterfuck. We didn't have any sense of what we were trying to say or any sense of what the truth was. We just stumbled through that. There was a couple episodes on nostalgia and stuff that were filler episodes we did because we had no money and Teller and I were not behind, that I would like to rip the fuck to pieces, because there was a few moments that I felt that we tried hard not to, but in the final end, there was a sense of showing disrespect to people who are obsessed with something. And anybody who shows disrespect to people who are obsessed is a pig. Whether it's Civil War reenactors, whether it's trekkers, whether it's Minecraft, whether it's video games, or whether it's classical music, if someone has a love and obsession, they are 12 feet tall and bulletproof. And there was a few times we rolled our eyes and kind of made fun of them, and I'm ashamed at that.
Can I on that episode also? The way these were generally put together is that we would discuss what we thought we were going to do with the episode, and then we would send our producers and our research team out. They would come back with a documentary, a sequence of documentary scenes, and then we would write the interstitial stuff that explained our positions, and we would write the VO. And there were a couple of times, and the good old days one is one of those episodes where the producers were absolutely at odds with us. I mean, they really wanted to roll their eyes over Civil War reenactors, so we had to take the exact documentary footage and turn the intention of it upside down to our point of view, which was, in that case, not only challenging but a failure.
And the other case, which was less of a failure, was they did a thing on speed dating. And they had, the producers had decided that people who did speed dating and computer dating and so on were losers. And I have never been, during the bullshit, I've never been more upset at any first cut of one before, because the villains were the heroes and the heroes were the villains. I believe that any way that two people consensually engage in sex is good. However they decide to do that is great. And electronics and speed dating and any sort of culture around that, it does not matter how you find love. It does not matter how you fall in love. And they were saying that there's some good way to do it, like, you run down the beach in slow motion and meet someone. And there's some bad way to do it, which is typing. And I disagree. I was seeing red on that episode, and we actually ended up, if you happen to watch whatever it is, it's the True Love episode. If you ever happen to see that episode coming up on Amazon or wherever it pops up, and you watch the footage and listen to my VO and our wraparounds, you'll be able to imagine that it was exactly the opposite. Exactly the opposite. And we did that a few times. So I think mostly, if we were going to do a bullshit, we haven't got really egregious mistakes that are as much fun as we'd like them to be. But I would like it to be an ad hominem attack against us. I would, because I finished high school on a plea bargain. Teller's degree from college is in the classics. If there are two people who are not qualified to talk about science, it's two jive-ass Las Vegas fucking empty-headed magicians. And that's what the show would mostly be. The show would mostly be embarrassing pictures of us with Donnie and Marie doing stupid tricks. And then say, who the fuck are these assholes to talk about science?
Thanks.
And I would like to end with, who the fuck are these assholes to talk about science?
Ladies and gentlemen, Penn and Teller. Thank you, guys.